Don't expect sympathy from me, my husband muttered as we pulled up to the curb outside my father's hospital wing. The car was still rolling when he said it, low, clipped, and intentionally cruel, like he wanted the words to bruise. The engine clicked as he turned it off, but the echo of his voice stayed, slicing through the cold air between us. I stared at him, fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. I wasn't asking for sympathy, I said quietly. Just support. He huffed. Same thing, Zuri. It wasn't. Not when it came from him. I pushed open the door before he could say anything else, the December wind snapping against my face. Inside the hospital's sliding doors, the warmth hit me hard enough to sting my eyes. They didn't water because of emotions, or at least that's what I told myself, but because the contrast between cold and warmth was too sudden. That was the story I stuck to. I am Zuri Nyong, 27 years old, and I work as a social worker for the county, the kind of person who's supposed to understand people, mediate between conflict, listen without judgment. Funny how I can untangle the knots of strangers' lives. Yet mine is always strangling me from the inside. Every day I sit across from families drowning in secrets and disappointments, trying to convince them that compassion is a choice. And every night I go home to a man who weaponizes my vulnerabilities like ammunition. But none of that mattered right now. My father was on the fourth floor. Observation and cardiac monitoring. Words you think only happen to other people. The elevator chimed and opened. My husband, Mason, stood with his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, annoyed that we'd even had to come. He hadn't always been like this. Or maybe he had, and I just got better at noticing. As we stepped off the elevator, the hallway stretched ahead, sterile, humming, carrying that faint antiseptic smell that clings to your clothes long after you leave. I paused at room 414. My father's name was taped neatly on the door. George Nyong. Black lettering on white paper. So small. So fragile. Funny how a lifetime of strength can be reduced to a temporary hospital printout. My heart rattled against my ribs. Mason noticed. Come on, he sighed. Let's get this over with. Get this over with. My father. I pushed inside. The room was dim except for the faint blue glow from the monitors. My father lay motionless except for the rise and fall of his chest. His once powerful hands, the same hands that taught me how to braid rope, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to defend myself, now rested, limply on starched sheets. My breath caught. Dad? I whispered. He didn't wake. A nurse stepped in behind us. He's stable, she said gently, but exhausted. You can talk to him if you like. He may hear you. Mason was already scrolling his phone. I ignored him. I moved closer, brushing a hand over my father's. His skin felt too cool, and something inside me twisted. Zuri? The nurse asked. You're his daughter? Yes. He was asking for you when he came in. My throat tightened. What had he been thinking? What had he wanted to tell me? Had he been scared? Thank you, I managed. The nurse smiled in that soft, tired way healthcare workers do, the way that says they've seen humanity in all its ugliest and most beautiful forms. When she left, the room fell into a hush. I sat on the edge of the chair beside Dad. For a few minutes, I just listened to the thrum of the monitors. Then Mason said from the doorway, So, is he waking up soon or what? I snapped my head toward him. Can you just be quiet for 5 minutes? He lifted one eyebrow. What? I'm asking a simple question. You're being insensitive. I'm being realistic. It's not exactly like he's dying. You don't know that. The words ripped out of me louder than I intended. My voice bounced against the walls, harsh and raw. Mason's expression didn't change. You're overreacting like always. I wanted to scream. Or cry. Or both. But my dad was right there. And I needed to be strong. For him. For myself. I took a slow breath. If you can't be supportive, just wait outside. He stared at me for a long second, long enough for me to see something ugly flicker in his eyes, before he pocketed his phone and stepped out of the room without another word. Good, good. I needed space to think, except thinking only made everything worse. My father. The hospital. The strained relationship between us. The secrets. God, the secrets. The ones I'd never told Mason. The ones that lived under my skin. The ones that made me feel like a fraud even in my own marriage. I inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of years I'd tried to pretend didn't exist pressing down on my chest. Dad, I whispered. I'm here. The monitor beeped steadily. Please wake up, I need you. For a second, I thought I imagined it, but his fingers twitched. Just barely. The tiniest brush of movement against mine. Dad? I leaned forward. His eyes didn't open, but his lips parted just enough for a soft, ragged sound to escape. It wasn't a word. Not yet. More like the hint of one. But it was enough to make my heart jolt. I leaned even closer, my breath trembling. Then I heard it. So faint I almost missed it. Don't trust. His throat tightened around the last word. Who? I whispered urgently. Dad, who shouldn't I trust? His eyelids fluttered, but he couldn't finish. The monitor's rhythm quickened. I grabbed his hand as panic clawed at me. Dad, please, please, tell me who? But all he managed to get out was, he knows. My skin went cold. He? Who was he? A doctor rushed in as the alarms picked up, guiding me aside. He's okay, she reassured. He's just agitated. Let's give him something to help him rest. I backed away, heart thundering. He knows. The phrase burned itself into my skull. Who knew what? About me? About him? About us? When I stepped into the hallway, Mason was leaning against the wall, scrolling again. He didn't even look up as he asked, Done? I stared at him, my father's warning echoing in my ears. And for the first time, the very first time, a thought crossed my mind. A thought that chilled me. Was he talking about Mason? I stared at Mason, my chest tightening, my mind spinning faster than the hospital ceiling fans. He knows, I whispered again, almost to myself. My voice barely carried, but Mason's head snapped up as though he'd just realized I'd spoken. Who? He asked, voice sharper than before. He sounded defensive. I swallowed hard. The words felt poisonous on my tongue. I can't say it. Not yet. Not without knowing. Dad tried to warn me. I stammered, my fingers tracing the thin line of his hospital bracelet. He said, he knows. Mason stepped closer, his shadow falling across the linoleum floor. Zuri, what are you talking about? I flinched at the closeness. I wasn't used to him stepping into my space without some kind of calculated aggression. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low, trying to charm, maybe manipulate, maybe test me. I didn't know which anymore. Don't, I said, firm this time. Just don't. The hospital corridor was quiet, only the distant squeak of a janitor's mop breaking the silence. But it wasn't enough to drown out the pounding of my heart. Mason looked at me like I was unhinged. Zuri, talk to me. I'm your husband. We share everything. We do? I wanted to scream. But could I really trust him with this? My father's warning felt like a dagger pressed between my ribs. Not everything, I said instead, my voice cold and controlled. He narrowed his eyes. So, what? You're hiding something from me now? Even here in the hospital? The accusation hit harder than I expected. Maybe because it was true. I had secrets, buried ones, layered with fear and shame. And I had a growing suspicion that Mason knew more than he let on. I turned and walked back into the room, ignoring his protests. I needed to be near Dad, to anchor myself before the storm broke completely. He was still lying there, pale and fragile, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor syncing with the rapid beating of my heart. I knelt beside him again, brushing his thinning hair from his forehead. You're safe, Dad. You're going to be okay. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. A nurse entered, clipboard in hand, giving me a polite smile. I just need to update you on his vitals. I nodded mutely, focusing on Dad. But every word from her was background noise compared to the echo of his warning. He knows. I left the room again for a breath of air. Hospital corridors always smelled of antiseptic and fear, an odd combination that made you feel alive and dead at the same time. Mason was waiting, leaning against the wall like a predator. Zuri, he said, softer this time. You're scaring me, and him too, if you're honest. What's going on? I took a slow step back. You don't get to ask that. He blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me? You heard me, I said, my voice rising. You don't get to ask. Not after everything. Everything. I meant the lies, the late-night disappearances, the way he looked at me sometimes like I was fragile property rather than a human being with agency. The way he always had to control the narrative, even in our own home. You're being dramatic, he said. I laughed bitterly. Dramatic? You have no idea. My father just tried to warn me about you. The color drained from his face. The man who had been so smug, so certain, suddenly seemed uncertain. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The brief flicker of fear was almost satisfying, almost. I turned away before I could say more. I had no idea if I could confront him here, in this sterile, fluorescent-lit prison of beeping machines and antiseptic smells. Instead, I found myself walking back down the hall, my mind racing. Mason's betrayal had always been a slow burn, but now it felt like gasoline. And my father's warning? It was a match. I didn't know what he meant exactly, but I had an inkling. He knows about the money. The inheritance from my mother's estate had been handled secretly. I had tried to protect Dad, shield him from Mason's growing obsession with control. But Mason had always had a way of sniffing out secrets, and now, Dad had warned me. The memory hit me in fragments. Dad coughing in the living room, a weak laugh hiding the pain. Mason's lingering glances at the ledger hidden in my desk drawer. My father's voice, trembling. "Zuri, be careful, he knows." I swallowed hard. My stomach twisted. Mason had always wanted more than just a partner. He wanted access, power, leverage. And I had allowed it, out of love or fear or habit. The realization hit me. I had underestimated him. I had thought my father's words were old paranoia, but Dad had seen through him. I glanced at my watch. Nearly 6 o'clock. The sky outside was darkening. Shadows stretched across the hospital parking lot like skeletal fingers. I needed to act, but I didn't know how. Back in Dad's room, I could hear the steady beeping of the monitor. His chest rose and fell in a fragile rhythm. My father's hand twitched again, and I grabbed it instinctively, pressing my own palm over his. "Tell me what to do," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. A part of me wanted to scream, to rip everything open and confront Mason right here, right now. But another part, the part Dad had always cultivated in me, knew I needed patience. Observation. Strategy. That was the work I was trained for. As a social worker, I mediated conflicts, assessed threats, and planned interventions. But this wasn't a case study. This was my life. My family. The thought made my stomach turn. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to calm down. My father was alive. That was the first step. Survival came before confrontation. And yet, the seeds of rage and fear were already taking root. Mason's shadow loomed in my mind like a storm cloud I couldn't ignore. He had always been subtle, the kind of predator that moves quietly until it's too late. And now, my father's warning had thrown a flare into the darkness. He knows. The words echoed in my mind again and again, each repetition a drumbeat of warning. I clenched my fists. My voice, though small, carried the weight of determination. "I will protect you, Dad, no matter what." And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't admitted even to myself. I couldn't trust Mason. Not completely. And maybe not at all. For the first time, the thought of reclaiming control, of digging into the shadows he had created around us, didn't terrify me. It sparked a fire I didn't know I had. The hospital room felt smaller, the air tighter. But I breathed anyway, one step at a time, because the moment Dad had warned me was the moment my life changed. And there was no turning back. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I stepped out of the hospital room again. Mason was still leaning against the wall, phone in hand, pretending he wasn't pacing the line between curiosity and suspicion. I forced myself to look calm, though every nerve in my body screamed. My father's last words, "he knows," had etched themselves into my mind like a warning etched in steel. "Zuri," Mason said, lowering his phone and squaring his shoulders, "you're scaring me." "Look, whatever he said, it's probably nothing. Your father's been stressed, sick. Maybe he didn't just say it." I snapped. My voice cracked, and I hated myself for the tremor that slipped through. Maybe he was trying to tell me something real, something important. Mason's expression darkened slightly. "Are you accusing me of?" "What? What exactly?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know yet, but I have to find out." He laughed softly, but it wasn't a joke. It was sharp, edged with something I didn't recognize in him. "You're being paranoid." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the accusation in his face and make him squirm under the weight of the truth, but I couldn't. Not here. Not in front of Dad. I turned back toward the room, searching for solace. But my father lay still, his chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of fragile life. I sank into the chair beside him again. I needed to process, to think, to plan. As a social worker, I was trained to see patterns. I studied behaviors, read between the lines, predicted outcomes. And right now, the pattern was terrifying. Mason had always been subtle. He had never yelled, never made a scene. But his control had always been quiet, meticulous, suffocating in ways that only revealed themselves over time. Now, my father's warning was proof. Evidence I couldn't ignore. He knows. Who knew what? And what had Dad seen that I hadn't? I remembered the way Mason had lingered near the ledger in my desk. The way his fingers brushed over paperwork as if testing its weight. I remembered the small lies. The disappearances. The way he always seemed to know too much about things he shouldn't. And then I remembered the night he had come home late, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his, and pretending it was just a meeting that ran long. My stomach churned. I had been blind. Or maybe I had chosen to be blind, because the truth was too dangerous to face. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. My father needed me calm. The hospital monitors were steady now, a fragile rhythm that anchored me. But I couldn't shake the fear, the creeping sensation that everything I had built, my marriage, my life, my sense of security, was teetering on the edge of a knife. I thought about the ledger again. The inheritance. My mother's estate. The money Mason had always hinted at but never asked for directly. I had been careful, meticulous, protective. But Mason was clever. He had ways of uncovering things without ever seeming suspicious. And now, my father's warning confirmed it. I opened my eyes and glanced at Mason, who was still waiting in the hallway, pretending not to notice my scrutiny. I had to be careful. I couldn't confront him yet. Not fully. Not until I knew exactly what he knew and how far he would go to get it. That was the first rule Dad had taught me about people like Mason. Observe. Wait. Understand. And so I waited, heart hammering in my chest, mind racing. The hours dragged. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the hospital bathed in cold, artificial light. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting IVs, asking routine questions. Mason never left the doorway, always hovering, always watching. I could feel the tension coiling between us, silent but palpable. I thought about calling my best friend, Kira. She had always been my sounding board, my voice of reason. But even she couldn't fully understand this. Mason had a way of twisting truths, of spinning lies so subtly that even I doubted myself sometimes. And yet, tonight, I couldn't doubt myself. Not with my father in that bed. Not with his warning echoing in my mind. I leaned closer to Dad, brushing his thinning hair back from his forehead. "Tell me what to do," I whispered. "Tell me how to keep safe." His hand twitched slightly beneath mine. His eyes flickered, but he didn't speak. The exhaustion and the illness had robbed him of his voice. I clenched my jaw. I would have to figure this out myself. The first step, I realized, was gathering information. Observing Mason. Watching for patterns. Understanding how he operated. I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I had to act. And yet, the thought of confronting him, even in the smallest way, made my stomach twist. Because Mason was patient. And I knew from experience that patience could be deadly in the wrong hands. I remembered the nights he had questioned me, subtly, about my clients, my cases, the money I handled. Nothing blatant, just enough to make me second-guess myself. Now, with Dad's warning, it made sense. Everything was connected. He knows. I whispered again, letting the words sink into the silence of the room. My father's warning had shifted something inside me. Fear had transformed into resolve. The kind of resolve that could cut through lies, deceit, and manipulation. I didn't know how yet. But I knew I couldn't ignore it. I glanced at the clock. Nearly 9 o'clock. The hospital was quieter now, the corridors mostly empty. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The first step was observation. The second would be planning. And the third would be action. I didn't know what Mason would do when he realized I was no longer blind. But I knew one thing. I couldn't let him control me. Not anymore. I pressed my hand against Dad's and whispered, "I'll protect you, I promise." For the first time since the warning, I felt a small spark of hope. Because even in the darkness, even with the threat looming, I was not powerless. And maybe, just maybe, I could turn the tables before it was too late. The night outside the hospital was still, almost unnaturally quiet. Snow had begun to fall, thin flakes drifting against the glow of the streetlights. And the world beyond the walls of room 414 seemed distant, unreal. Inside, I paced the small space between the chair and Dad's bed, my mind a tight coil of fear, suspicion, and something else, determination. Mason was gone. He said he needed to clear his head after our argument, but I didn't trust him. I hadn't trusted him for a while now. That didn't stop the flicker of worry that passed over me. What if he came back? What if he knew more than I thought? I pressed my hand to my father's arm, feeling the subtle warmth beneath his skin. The monitors beeped steadily, the only consistent sound in a world that had suddenly become unpredictable. I thought back to the last time Dad had been fully coherent, to the way he had always emphasized vigilance, caution, the ability to read between the lines. He had trained me without me realizing it, teaching me to notice body language, to question intentions, to never take words at face value. Now those lessons mattered more than ever. I pulled my phone from my bag and opened the secure notes app I kept for work cases. There was a folder I rarely accessed, one labeled Family, Private, where I had logged small observations about Mason over the years. Nothing incriminating in the legal sense, but enough to notice patterns. I scrolled through them, overly interested in financial documents. Watches my reactions closely. Always wants to accompany me on social work visits. Asks too many personal questions. Subtle intimidation. Just trying to help you be honest. I swallowed hard. Each note was a breadcrumb, a trail that suddenly made perfect sense. Mason wasn't just controlling. He was strategic, calculated, a predator hidden in plain sight. The realization made my stomach churn, but it also sparked a fire. I wasn't going to let fear win. Not here. Not for my father. I needed information. First step, surveillance, observation. Without him knowing I was watching. I set my phone on silent and opened the camera app, pretending to check emails while subtly scanning the room. The hospital didn't allow cameras in rooms, but I could record small snippets surreptitiously, evidence, not proof, but pieces of the puzzle. I looked at Dad again. His chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. His eyes flickered, and I reached over, brushing the hair from his forehead. "I'll figure this out," I whispered. "I'll protect you." The first hours passed in a tense rhythm. Nurses came and went, checking vitals and adjusting IVs. I greeted each one with polite words, but my mind was elsewhere, spinning scenarios, predicting Mason's moves, thinking 3 steps ahead. By midnight, the hospital had grown quieter. Mason hadn't returned. Part of me hoped he had gone home, defeated by my refusal to engage. But another part, the part trained to read signs, to expect the unexpected, knew better. He would return, and when he did, he would have a plan. I couldn't let him see fear. I couldn't let him know I had pieced together even a fraction of the truth. So I waited. When the door finally creaked open, I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Mason. He stepped inside, hands in his pockets, a careful smile on his face. "Can't sleep?" he asked casually, though the tension in his posture betrayed him. I looked at him calmly, a mask of composure over the storm inside. "Someone has to stay with Dad." He nodded slowly, pretending to understand, moving to the chair across from me. "Right. Of course." I studied him carefully, every movement, every flicker of expression. His eyes lingered on the monitors, on Dad, then back to me. Too quick, too precise. He was calculating, testing. "You seem tense," he said lightly. I tilted my head, giving him a polite smile. "Just worried. He's fragile. And I've learned to be cautious." He chuckled softly, but it was a dangerous sound, too smooth, too controlled. "Cautious? With me?" The words hung in the air. Subtle, loaded with insinuation. I met his gaze directly, refusing to flinch. "With everyone. Especially the people closest to me." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A small victory. I felt a shiver of satisfaction. He wasn't omniscient. Not yet. Then he leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, hands steepled. "You've changed," he said. "You're sharper than I remember." I didn't respond. Observation was key. Every word, every inflection, every subtle movement mattered. He glanced toward Dad, then back at me. "You're hiding something," he said softly. "I can tell." I let a faint frown cross my face. "Am I?" I asked, voice calm, measured. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied me, as if weighing the truth in my eyes. Then he said, "Be careful, Zuri. Secrets have a way of unraveling, a warning, or a threat." I couldn't tell which. I didn't flinch. "I've learned that lesson already," I said. The tension between us was a taut wire, vibrating with unspoken truths. Mason wasn't just a threat, he was a test. And I was beginning to see the shape of the challenge he posed. As he finally stood to leave, I noticed a flicker of hesitation in his movements. A small sign, almost imperceptible, that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't anticipated my response. I held his gaze until he disappeared into the hallway. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed like a punctuation mark in the quiet room. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Hours later, when the hospital had grown nearly silent, I returned to my phone. I opened the secure notes again, reviewing patterns, behaviors, small inconsistencies I had once dismissed. Then I remembered something else. The night Mason had gone through my bag, looking for a check I had hidden from him. He hadn't found it, but he had been subtle in his frustration. That night had been a warning too, just one I hadn't understood until now. And now, with Dad's words ringing in my ears, it all connected. I was at the beginning of a dangerous game, one where every move mattered, one where trust was a weapon and deceit a shield. I had always prided myself on understanding people, on seeing through layers, on predicting outcomes. Now, I would have to apply that skill to the person I should have trusted the most, Mason. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the realization settle. Fear lingered, but it was tempered by determination. I couldn't let him win, not with my father's life at stake, not with my own. The first steps of strategy formed in my mind: observation, patience, subtle testing of boundaries, careful gathering of evidence. And when the moment was right, confrontation. But not yet. Not until I knew I could control the outcome. Because Mason was clever, calculated, dangerous, and I had to be smarter. I pressed my hand to Dad's arm one last time before resting against the chair, eyes on the monitor. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. Fragile, yes, but alive. I whispered a vow into the quiet room. I will protect you. I will uncover the truth. And I will not let him take what is ours. The monitors beeped in steady rhythm, a fragile but powerful reminder that life, even in the shadow of danger, continues. And so did the fight. The hospital was quiet in the early hours of the morning, the soft hum of fluorescent lights filling the space between my racing thoughts. Mason hadn't returned since I last saw him, and the emptiness felt like both a relief and a trap. Every shadow seemed too long, every distant noise too deliberate. I was scanning Dad's room again, looking for anything at all, that could help me understand Mason's intentions. I didn't need proof yet, not in the legal sense. I needed patterns, breadcrumbs, glimpses of his strategy, and maybe, just maybe, a weakness I could exploit. My gaze fell on Dad's side table. Amid the water glass, tissues, and an outdated magazine, I noticed something odd. A folded envelope, partially hidden under the corner of his prescription medications. My curiosity piqued. I picked it up. Inside was a sheet of paper, a handwritten note, in my father's shaky handwriting. "Zuri, if anything happens, follow the ledger. Be careful of Mason. He knows more than he should. Trust no one completely. Dad." My heart stopped. The ledger. I had been keeping it in a locked drawer at home, hidden from Mason. Every account, every transaction, every detail about the inheritance meticulously documented. And now, for the first time, I realized why Dad had been so protective. I needed access. I needed the ledger. I also needed to plan. Mason had always been careful, subtle, calculating, patient. But he hadn't seen this coming. He didn't know that Dad had left me a direct warning, a map to protect myself. A surge of determination rushed through me. This was the turning point. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing, strategizing. Back at my apartment, the familiar apartment that had become a cage over time, I approached the drawer where the ledger lay. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was resolve. Inside, the ledger was just as meticulous as I remembered. Dates, amounts, transactions, notes about accounts, insurance, investments, even hidden assets that Mason didn't know existed. I skimmed through it quickly, noting patterns. Mason had never known about the offshore accounts, the investments under my mother's maiden name, the safety nets Dad had set up in case something went wrong. A plan began to form. I didn't just want to protect the money. I wanted to turn it into leverage, evidence, a shield I could use against Mason if he stepped too far. I pulled out my phone and took photos of select pages, storing them securely in a hidden, encrypted folder. Every precaution mattered. Mason's subtle ways of discovering secrets were formidable. But now, for the first time, I felt ahead. The next day, I returned to the hospital, carrying a calm exterior. Mason was there, leaning against the wall like always, eyes sharp, calculating. But something was different. He didn't know yet that I had discovered the ledger's hidden details. I walked past him to Dad's side, careful to maintain a neutral expression. I had to act normal. No cracks, no hints, no fear. "Good morning," Mason said, voice smooth, casual. "Morning," I replied, voice steady. The subtle battle had begun. Observation, patience, calculated responses. Dad stirred slightly, and I adjusted his blanket. His chest rose and fell steadily, the monitor steady. I pressed his hand gently. "I've got this," I whispered. Mason's gaze flicked between Dad and me. I could see the tension in his jaw. He didn't know I had a countermeasure, the ledger. And that gave me power. Power I had never felt in this marriage before. Later that evening, after Mason left for a meeting, I sat alone in Dad's hospital room, my phone buzzing softly with messages from work. I ignored them, focusing instead on strategy. I reviewed the ledger photos again. Each hidden account, each safety net, each note from Dad. All pieces of a puzzle Mason had never completed. If he tried to take the money, manipulate me, or threaten Dad, I now had the upper hand. Knowledge. Evidence. A path forward. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about control, about reclaiming my agency in a life that Mason had slowly been suffocating. I realized, with a clarity that was almost frightening, that I could outmaneuver him. Carefully, patiently, strategically. I would test him. I would push, subtly, to see how far he would go. And I would record every move. That night, I returned home, exhausted but focused. Mason wasn't there yet. Late night work, he said. But I couldn't rest. Not fully. Not until I had a sense of how he would react. I set up small, subtle ways to monitor him. Encrypted emails, logs of his movements, notes on his behaviors. It wasn't about spying. Not yet. It was about survival. About being ready for the moment he made his move. The ledger had shifted the balance of power. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing. I realized something else. Fear could be a tool, but so could patience. And I had both. A week passed. Dad stabilized slowly, the monitors no longer showing alarming fluctuations. But Mason's presence was still a shadow, looming, subtle, calculated. One evening, while reviewing the ledger and double-checking security measures, my phone rang. It was Mason. "Zuri," he said, voice smooth, casual. "Can we talk?" I paused, weighing my options. This was a test. A probe. A way to gauge if I knew. "Sure," I said evenly. "Where?" "Home," he replied. "Just the two of us." I swallowed. My pulse quickened, but I didn't let it show. "Okay, see you soon." As I hung up, I realized the full gravity of what was coming. Mason was confident, dangerous, and unaware that I now had leverage. But he was testing me, probing, searching for cracks. And I was ready. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was prepared. That night, as I drove home, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The ledger had changed everything. I was no longer a passive observer in my own life. I was ready to fight. And when Mason realized I wasn't the same woman he had married, it would be too late. The first move had been made. The balance of power had shifted. And for the first time, I felt a dangerous, thrilling sense of control. The apartment was quiet when I arrived that night. Snow had fallen thicker than before, piling along the sidewalks and muffling the world outside. Mason was already there, pacing the living room, a cigarette clutched between his fingers. He hadn't seen me yet. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting him notice me. The way he turned, eyes narrowing slightly, told me everything I needed to know. He sensed a shift. He could feel the subtle tension in the air. "Zuri," he said smoothly, voice casual, almost teasing. "You look different." I let a small, controlled smile slip onto my face. "Do I?" He flicked the cigarette away, not breaking eye contact. "Yes. You're sharper. Careful. Like you're hiding something." I didn't flinch. I walked toward him slowly, deliberately, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Every step was measured. I needed him to feel the shift, to recognize, even if he couldn't articulate it, that the game had changed. "I'm not hiding anything," I said softly. "Not from you." He raised an eyebrow. "Not from me? Or not from yourself?" I let the silence hang. He shifted slightly, a flicker of impatience crossing his face. He didn't like the uncertainty. He never liked the uncertainty. "You've been watching me," he said finally, "studying my moves, testing me. Maybe," I replied, calm, steady, "but maybe I'm just paying attention." He stepped closer, the subtle predator in him coming forward. "You think you're in control now?" he whispered, voice low, dangerous. "You think you've figured me out?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I've figured enough." That seemed to shake him. For a fraction of a second, his control faltered. A slip, a weakness, and I noticed it immediately. "You're bluffing," he said, though the edge in his voice betrayed him. "Am I?" I replied. My hand brushed over the edge of the coffee table, where I had secretly placed a copy of the ledger I had photographed, a subtle, hidden reminder that I wasn't powerless. He took another step closer, his voice dropping. "Zuri, you don't know what you're dealing with." "Oh, I think I do," I said, firm now. "I know you. I know your patterns. I know how you operate." The air between us crackled. Mason's eyes darkened, a dangerous gleam surfacing. He had underestimated me. And that mistake, I realized, would cost him control. "You're bold," he said. "I'll give you that. But bold doesn't always win." I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice calm but unwavering. "Sometimes, bold is the only way to survive." We circled each other in that tense silence, words sparse but heavy with meaning. Mason was testing me, trying to find the crack in my armor. I was testing him, measuring his reactions, looking for the exact moment to strike. And then it came. A careless smirk, a slight misstep in his posture, a faint slip in his words. He didn't realize he had revealed the truth. But I did. I reached into my bag, pulling out my phone and placing it on the table, encrypted ledger files open and visible. Just enough for him to notice, not enough for him to access. He froze. "You really were keeping it from me," he said softly, almost a whisper. "Yes," I replied, "because you can't be trusted." His eyes narrowed, but there was no anger in them, not yet. There was calculation, weighing his options, trying to figure out how much I knew. "I see," he said finally. "So, this is how it is now. You're the one in control." I tilted my head, letting a small, dangerous smile cross my lips. "Control is relative. But yes, for now, I have it." He laughed softly, a low, unsettling sound. "For now," he repeated. Interesting. The tension thickened. Every word, every glance, every pause carried weight. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about trust, power, and survival. I could feel the shift inside me, the transformation from fear to strategy, from reaction to action. For the first time, I was not just a participant in this battle. I was leading it. "Zuri?" Mason said suddenly, voice low, almost intimate. "You think you've won? That you can outmaneuver me?" I met his gaze directly. "I don't think, Mason. I know I can." His lips curved in a subtle, dangerous smile. "Good. I like your confidence, but confidence can be fragile." "I've learned to be stronger than fragile," I replied, and in that moment, I realized something essential. I didn't need to fear him, not fully. Fear was a tool, yes, but so was strategy, knowledge, observation, patience. I had all of those now. And Mason. He had underestimated me. The tension in the room was suffocating, charged with unspoken threats and untested boundaries. Every step, every word, every glance was part of a silent battle. And I was ready. We stood in silence for a long moment. The only sound the soft hum of the heater and the faint whisper of snow against the windows. Then Mason's expression shifted. He leaned back slightly, a sign of concession, though not of surrender. He knew he had to be careful, that I was no longer the same woman he had married. "You're clever," he admitted finally. "I didn't see this coming." "I've learned from the best," I said, voice calm, measured. "But unlike you, I have something you don't." He paused. "And what's that?" "Integrity," I said softly, letting the word hang between us. "And loyalty to my family, to my father, to myself." His jaw tightened, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. He wasn't used to being outmaneuvered by someone he considered weaker, but I was stronger now, smarter, and ready. For the first time, I realized something profound. Survival wasn't enough. I could reclaim my life, protect my father, protect myself, and Mason. He would have to adapt or lose everything he had tried to manipulate and control. By the end of that night, the balance of power had shifted definitively. Mason left the apartment later, silent, thoughtful, calculating. He hadn't lost entirely, not yet. But he had recognized, perhaps for the first time, that I was not to be underestimated. I remained in the apartment, alone with my thoughts, my phone, and the ledger. The confrontation had been a test, a dangerous dance of words and glances. But I had passed. And for the first time in months, I felt a strange mixture of relief and exhilaration. Because now I wasn't just reacting, I was leading. And in this battle, that made all the difference. The morning light filtered weakly through the apartment curtains, casting pale streaks across the floor. The city outside was waking slowly, muffled by the fresh snow. But inside, the silence was heavier. It wasn't the oppressive silence of fear anymore. It was the quiet after a battle. I sat at the small kitchen table, the ledger open in front of me. My hands hovered over it, not touching, not moving. I had won a confrontation last night, yes, but the victory was tentative, fragile. Mason hadn't retreated entirely. He had simply acknowledged that I was no longer passive. That acknowledgement was dangerous because it meant he was already plotting his next move. I took a slow breath and reviewed the ledger again. Every account, every note, every detail meticulously documented. It was more than money now. It was protection, a weapon, and a reminder of Dad's trust in me. Dad. My thoughts shifted to him. He was still in the hospital, fragile and recovering. I had called earlier and received updates from the nurse, stable, alert, and asking for me by name. That tiny flicker of connection, the one he had always relied on, felt like a lifeline. I had promised him protection. I intended to keep that promise. By mid-morning, Mason appeared at the apartment door. He knocked once, sharply, then waited. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted him to feel the shift in control, to recognize, even subconsciously, that I was no longer the same woman he had manipulated for months. When I opened the door, he was calm. Too calm, almost artificially so. But I had learned to read him. The subtle tension in his shoulders, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the brief hesitation before speaking, all signs that he was assessing the new landscape between us. "Good morning," he said, voice smooth. "I hope you slept well." I studied him carefully, then stepped aside. "Come in. But know this, I'm not playing games anymore." He raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I wasn't planning to. We moved through the apartment in a cautious rhythm. Every word measured, every gesture deliberate. It was a dance, a delicate negotiation of power. Over the next few hours, I carefully tested the boundaries I had established. I asked subtle questions, gauged his reactions, watched for inconsistencies. Mason was clever, yes, calculating, patient, strategic, but he was also arrogant. He hadn't expected me to adapt so quickly, to claim the power that had always been just out of reach. I realized something critical. I didn't just need to defend myself and Dad. I needed to anticipate him, predict his moves, and, if necessary, preempt them. By late afternoon, Mason had left again, ostensibly for work. But this time, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He knew I was aware of his capabilities. That awareness, I realized, was more dangerous than any money, any ledger, any secret. For the first time, I felt a small but profound sense of empowerment. I wasn't just surviving. I was strategizing, planning, controlling. Later, I visited Dad in the hospital. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Zuri," he whispered, voice weak but filled with relief. "You're handling him?" I squeezed his hand gently. "Yes, Dad, I'm protecting you and myself." He nodded slowly, a small smile on his lips. "I knew you would. I always knew you had it in you." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. I had work to do, battles to fight, but in that moment, there was quiet pride and a recognition of what had been accomplished. Dad's trust in me had been validated. And that trust was now my anchor, my guide through the storm. Back home, I began implementing subtle security measures. Encrypted backups of the ledger, secure passwords, discreet monitoring. I wasn't paranoid, I was vigilant. Every precaution, every measure was part of reclaiming control. I also began documenting Mason's patterns, creating a detailed record of his behaviors, inconsistencies, and manipulations. This wasn't just strategy, it was protection. For me, for Dad, for anyone else who might be caught in his orbit. And through it all, I noticed a strange shift within myself. Fear was no longer the dominant force. It had been replaced by calculation, foresight, and resolve. I had transformed from a reactive participant to an active strategist. By evening, the apartment felt calm. Mason hadn't returned. The snow outside had ceased, leaving a serene, deceptive quiet. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city. I reflected on the journey, the warnings, the subtle betrayals, the confrontation, and realized that life would never return to the way it had been. That world, where I trusted blindly and allowed manipulation to shape my existence, was gone. But that loss was not entirely painful. It had been replaced by something stronger: awareness, agency, and a sense of moral clarity. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was navigating, leading, controlling. And that made all the difference. A small buzz from my phone reminded me that the world outside still moved. Messages from colleagues, updates from the hospital, news alerts. But I felt detached from it all, focused instead on the deeper currents of power, loyalty, and trust that now defined my life. Mason had been a threat, yes, a formidable one, but he had underestimated me. And in doing so, he had shifted the balance irrevocably. I allowed myself a small, private smile. The ledger, the warnings, the knowledge, it was all in my hands, all under my control. And for the first time in months, I felt truly safe. But I knew better than to let my guard down completely. Mason's cunning was formidable, and he would adapt, adjust, and test boundaries again. That was inevitable. What mattered now was preparedness, vigilance, and the subtle, deliberate exercise of power. And I was ready. As the night deepened, I returned to Dad's bedside once more. He was sleeping, fragile but stable. I pressed my hand gently to his, whispering softly, "I'll keep you safe, Dad, no matter what comes next." The monitors beeped steadily, a rhythm that mirrored my own resolve. Life, fragile yet persistent, continued. And so did I. The first light of dawn crept into the apartment, pale and cautious, like it was wary of the night's shadows. I sipped my tea slowly, feeling the warmth in my hands, the quiet hum of the city beyond the window. The ledger lay closed on the table, but its presence was palpable, a symbol of my regained control. Mason hadn't called or returned overnight. That silence was both a relief and a threat. I knew better than to assume it meant he had given up. He was calculating, patient, always testing boundaries, waiting for the perfect moment to assert himself. I wasn't afraid anymore, not truly. I had learned the power of observation, patience, and strategy. I had learned to anticipate, to plan, to act. And now I knew that control was something I could wield. Carefully, precisely, without fear. I visited Dad at the hospital mid-morning. He was awake, alert, eyes bright with recognition when I walked in. "Zuri," he whispered, a small smile on his lips. "You've changed." I nodded, taking his hand in mine. "I had to, Dad. For you. For me, for all of us." He studied me for a moment, then chuckled softly. "You've grown stronger, smarter, just like your mother." The comparison stung, bittersweet. Mom had been clever, fearless in ways I was only beginning to understand. But now, I could feel a spark of that same fire in me, tempered by experience, sharpened by betrayal, and focused by determination. "I'm ready," I said quietly. "I won't let anything happen to you." He nodded slowly, eyes softening. "I know." Back at the apartment, I reviewed the ledger once more, checking and double-checking entries, patterns, and security measures. Every precaution mattered now. Mason's subtle manipulations had always relied on secrecy, on exploiting gaps I had once ignored. But now, the gaps were gone. Every detail accounted for, every risk mitigated. I felt a strange sense of exhilaration. For the first time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was orchestrating the terms of engagement, setting the pace, defining the rules. And that realization gave me power, a heady, dangerous, intoxicating kind of power. By evening, Mason finally returned. The snow outside had stopped, leaving a cold, crisp silence in its wake. I watched from the living room as he entered, posture careful, eyes scanning, measuring. He paused when he saw the ledger on the table, closed but visible. His eyes flickered, a mix of caution and curiosity. I met his gaze calmly, allowing a small, deliberate smile to play across my lips. Zuri, he said softly, almost cautiously, we need to talk. I nodded slowly. We do. The conversation that followed was a careful dance. Words were chosen deliberately, every inflection measured. Mason attempted his usual subtle manipulations, probing for weaknesses, testing boundaries, gauging my reactions. But I was ready. I anticipated each move, responding not with fear or defensiveness, but with calm, controlled precision. I've changed, I said finally, voice steady, unwavering. I won't let you manipulate me anymore. Not my life. Not Dad's life. Not anything that's ours. He studied me carefully, the shadow of a smirk flickering, then disappearing. You're clever, he admitted. Too clever, maybe. More clever than me. Maybe, I replied, but cleverness alone isn't enough. Knowledge, patience, and strategy. That's what counts. He leaned back slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of the shift in power. He knew, even if he wouldn't admit it, that the game had changed. And I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the understanding that the battle was far from over, but that he had already lost some ground. That night, I returned to Dad's hospital room once more. He was resting peacefully, the monitors steady, breathing even. I pressed my hand to his, feeling the fragile warmth beneath his skin. I've got this, I whispered. We're safe, for now, and we'll stay that way. He opened his eyes slightly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I trust you, he said softly. The words were more than reassurance. They were a confirmation of my journey, my transformation, and the promise I had made to protect, to defend, and to navigate the shadows with courage and clarity. Back home, I set up the final layer of security measures for the ledger and my digital archives. Encrypted backups, secure passwords, and redundant safeguards, everything in place. Every precaution mattered now because Mason was clever, patient, and unpredictable. And yet, for the first time, I wasn't paralyzed by fear. I was vigilant, yes, but also confident. Every step I took was deliberate, calculated, informed by knowledge and experience. I realized that control wasn't about domination or fear. It was about preparation, strategy, and awareness. It was about anticipating threats and navigating them with intelligence and precision. And that was something Mason hadn't anticipated. As the night deepened, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. The journey had been harrowing, betrayal, fear, manipulation, and the constant threat of loss. But through it all, I had discovered something profound: my own strength. I had learned to navigate danger with intelligence, to assert control without losing my moral compass, and to protect those I loved while maintaining my own agency. I was no longer the woman who had blindly trusted. I was not just surviving. I was thriving. And Mason, he would have to learn the hard way that the rules had changed. I pressed my hand to the ledger one last time, feeling the weight of knowledge, strategy, and security. It wasn't just a collection of numbers and accounts. It was a symbol of everything I had fought for: my father's trust, my own agency, and the power to navigate a world filled with deceit and danger. The monitors beeped steadily in my mind, a rhythm of life and vigilance. Outside, the city lay quiet, the snow a soft blanket over the streets, concealing the dangers beneath. And I was ready for whatever came next, because I had learned that survival wasn't enough. I had learned to lead, to strategize, and to reclaim control. And that made all the difference. I looked out the window at the quiet city, whispering softly to myself, the game has changed. And now, I'm the one calling the shots.